Hey YouTubes, there's a reason why this car is everything it is, and sometimes there's just too much of everything it's made of going on all over it. The original creator of this build insisted that it be built out of only used parts. This was an unwritten rule that I continued to follow for a while until I blew it up and rebuilt it myself. But these subs right here are a relic of that old rule. After all, this is a street legal street car, so what's wrong with a little bump in the trunk? They've been here this whole time I've been drag racing it, every time, and there's a reason for it. It's called respect, and we'll get to that. All this is a tiny little precision power 275 amp wired to two JBL 10-inch dual voice coil subs, bridged mono at 1 ohm because I'm using all 4 coils. The box is nothing fancy, it's just a 1 cubic foot sealed enclosure made of MDF, but some of these old amps are pretty stable and can surprise you. In fact, I blew the seams out of the box before and then I repaired it. That's why there's 100 screws in it now. It definitely conforms to the used parts rule. I also have another used PPI 4400 4-channel amp driving the rest of the speakers in the car so that I could tune around the acoustic problems of this interior. It's pretty obvious that I have no interest in tuning any of this equipment anymore. I'm not getting rid of the sizzle though, I'm just getting rid of the steak. I'm going to have subwoofers in this thing still, but what I won't have is several dozen pounds of dead weight behind the rear axle. This is not an audiophile's choice of optimal listening environment anyway. You know, putting subs in the trunk of a first-gen Elantra is like wrapping a foam mattress topper around your head before putting your headphones on. The trunk of this car is not rigid enough to send that bass inside the passenger compartment when the back seats are upright, so most of the power generated back here is lost. Never mind that the whole stereo system is competing with a well-aspirated 4G63 turbo engine bolted to the chassis with solid mounts, and of course the 3-inch cutout. Fidelity has nothing to do with why these subs were here. They're just here because the fastest quarter-mile time ever produced by any Hyundai Elantra ever built had subwoofers in it. That's where the respect part comes into play. I relate to that kind of build. I did that once, I get it. Subwoofers are not a requirement for breaking any sort of automotive racing record. I just accept all the same challenges and handicaps in my journey with this car to show my appreciation for the guy who did it first. This is not an easy chassis at all to achieve what he accomplished with it, and I actually have no clue whether or not they were in it at the time when he set his record. But my goal's never been to take any of that accomplishment away from him, really. He's held it for decades and it's well deserved. This has been the absolute most difficult car I've ever tried to get traction with, and while there's lots of performance solutions for overcoming all of its faults if I were to turn it into a race-only chassis, I don't ever want to take out any of the street car appeal from it, period. I don't want to remove any of the features of what, in a racer's opinion, would be unnecessary luxuries. This car is the all-powered option GLS model, not the manual powered GL. Powered mirrors, windows, and locks. And it's got some bells and whistles that I didn't have to install in it. Most everything it came with besides its original automatic transmission still works because I've maintained them. And some of the other modifications its original builder installed into it to make a swap fit, I've changed it, drastically. Despite my efforts, there's still remnants of both of these things all throughout the chassis that are unnecessary dead weight, or that show up in the form of clutter. Looks bad, at least it does to me, and I want it gone. Sort of like this transmission control unit and all the automatic transmission harness crap. I'm not swapping it back to an auto transmission, and if I did, this is not the stuff I'd ever use to do it with. But it's all still here. It's been getting a free ride for the decade since this thing was built, and it's in the way of something else that I want to do to it. There's just one problem. The factory service manual's wiring diagrams are a complete disaster for this car, and it's not worth the time to decipher. You saw that in a previous video once, but take my word for it in this one. In order for me to get all of the automatic transmission wiring out of the car, it's actually going to take less time to extract it if I just manually chase down and trace every single one of the wires throughout the vehicle and find where they go. There's no better present I can give this car but my time. I don't think that's really how the saying goes, but I know it's an accurate statement. I received this car with the battery relocation already done, and several other modifications that I installed had wiring run to the battery. Though I moved the battery back to the engine bay, I didn't move any of that other wiring. There's a 1-gauge cable already running the length of the car, and I maintained that cable just to power all those other things. The fuel pump wire, the water methanol kit, the 12-volt outlets I installed, all of the amplification stuff for the stereo. There's the clutter I was talking about. If I'm removing the stereo equipment that was there, and the battery has already been moved back to the engine bay, then all the things that I'm powering from the trunk need to be moved back to being powered from the engine bay too. The stereo is not going away. It looked like it was there for a second, but what I'm really doing is taking a more modern approach to my needs in order to move the weight that's working against me achieving any of my goals. Aside from the old stereo's hideous appearance, there's newer, lighter, and more practical means of achieving all of my original goals, and you're looking at it. I had a pair of subs before, so I bought 2 of these things. One of my fishing buddies had one of these in his truck and I was impressed, but one sub isn't going to cut it for me. And why should only one front seat passenger get a butt massage? My logic with installing 2 of these is about matching what I had at the very least. The PPI 275 bridged mono at 1 ohm produces about 350 watts of dirty power. After all, it's really just a 75 watt per channel, 2-channel amp, being stretched far beyond that point with some resistance trickery. Each one of these subs is rated at 135 watts RMS with a 200 watt peak. Never mind the weight shift for a second. Installing these inches away from the butt of the listener is going to make all of the bass much more audible than it ever would 8 feet from their ears and obstructed by the rear seat. I'm anxious to find out how they sound, but I've got a ton of other electrical sleuthing to do that has nothing to do with these subs before I'll ever be able to find out. I found that the automatic transmission harness snaked up behind the dashboard and appeared to run through the passenger side fender to the engine bay. That's what I could tell without removing the dashboard. To avoid that, I took the whole factory body harness apart, all the loom between those points, carefully removing the 30-year-old factory zip clips without breaking them, just so I could put it all back together correctly again once I'm finished. Once everything was loose and visible, I was able to pull slack on the body harness and see which wires actually made it from the body harness into the passenger compartment's TCU harness. Only then, after feeling and seeing these results, can I cut that wire. Once enough wires were removed to create slack inside the factory firewall loom grommet, I used the opportunities that some of the cut wires provided me with to fish 8 and 10 gauge power wires for all of the accessories and modifications that I wanted to home run to the battery. It's the tidiest thing that I could come up with. This routing would accomplish everything I'm trying to do right now with my accessory power and cleanup. I'm getting 2 birds stoned at once. I don't ever want to see any of this wiring again once I'm finished, and it's all going to be secure and protected. So I'm down to about 10 wires. Worked 16 hours yesterday, just trying to figure out where all of that went, where it routed through the car, and whether I needed it or not. It's a good thing I did look at that, because there were 57 wires going through this fender, and there's only like 35 going through from the interior. So if I had just cut right through that, that would have been really bad. You saw me there. I was testing carefully to see which one of them I was pulling through and which one of them went through that harness. Everything on the other leg of it was completely disconnected, so pulling those out gave me enough room to run 10 gauge through here. 3 strands of it so far. I've got 1 more to pull for the fuel pump, and then I have power for my amplifiers, the accessories that are behind the dash, and everything moved from the trunk. And I'll show you an example of what we've pulled out of this thing so far. Yeah, there you go. TCU, that much wiring so far. Just going back to the standard Alpine deck has been a good move. It really cleaned up the inside of the dashboard substantially. I don't need that extra weight. I've still got some lumber back here to remove, and I got to sort out some wiring for the water methanol kit and the ground for the fuel pump, and everything's moving to the front harness, so I don't need to worry about this stuff back here anymore. It'll all be gone soon. That will get cleaned up. Getting rid of this thing's going to be awesome. So back at it again. When the loom starts getting full, using a little bit of dish soap on the wires can help you overcome the friction resistance and sometimes even the obstacles that are in your way while you're pulling wires. Plus, it should smell better than everything else that you've encountered so far. But it really does make pulling those wires through an existing harness, loom, or grommet a whole lot easier. These are just common sense things that I often lack the common sense to always think of on my own. I did the same thing with the other tag ends of the wires that I clipped to fish them the rest of the way through the zip ties and the loom and the harness into the engine bay. Now everything that I need will come through one centralized location a very short distance away from where they need to terminate to the battery. Once all the fender well harness wires were confirmed to be removed, the useless remainder parts of it were discarded. The pile keeps growing. So now I got 4 pieces of 10 gauge cable for my amps, fuel pump and accessories pulled through. I got 4 pieces of 8 gauge cable that go to the factory relay and fuse box to terminate together, a starter cable, an alternator cable, an old stupid looking piece of crap battery terminal to throw away. Inside the interior you can see those 10 cut wires that go to things like the gauge cluster, the non-existent automatic shifter, and the overdrive switch. The power wire for the accessory relay and the center console routes behind the glove box, and also the 3 power wires for my amps and fuel pump, which will be routed through the factory TCU harness channel provided by Hyundai. That's so nice of them. Yes, you did just see that a 1992 Hyundai Elantra can fit a whole Jafro into the trunk. 2 of me would fit as long as there isn't any eye contact. It's time to remove the original lumber that supported the battery relocation wiring, and of course the amplifier wiring, the fuel pump relay, the water methanol kit. All the power and grounds for these things, all of it has to be redone. I no longer need that 1 gauge cable that fed all of them. Let's get that thing loose, shall we? Stupid battery terminal. The power cable routed through the firewall above my pedal assembly, and I feel a whole lot better about the new accessory wiring bulkhead location than I do about this one. Of course, who can forget the old 200 amp circuit breaker to protect the power feed back here? This is not the ideal way to ever do this, and I'm really glad to see it go. Since I just deleted my fuel pump circuit, now I have to make a new one. I've got plenty of relay, and the socket has what I need on it already, except that it doesn't fit my wiring gauge requirements. So to remedy this, I've left the trigger wires in place, but I pulled the switch circuits leads out of it. I need to make my own connections for the 10 gauge wires for my fuel pump. 16 gauge just wasn't going to cut it. So what I did is I just crimped my own spade connectors onto the 10 gauge wire and shrink tubed it for extra protection, because it's a power wire connected to the battery after all. That, and it helps the female spade connector snug itself into the socket a little tighter. I can make the lead that connects to the battery later, once I know how long it needs to be, but the rest of these power wires absolutely have to be able to reach the battery, or else everything that I just did here was a waste of time. I'd have to redo it all. So I'm putting plenty of wire through the harness to ensure that happens before I go any further. The first stop for the fuel pump wire is not this relay socket though. It's actually going to be running through a self-resetting circuit breaker. So I've cut the wire short to route it there first, and then put a ring terminal on it so that I can easily attach it to the circuit breaker. Next order of business is to find all of it a home, and more than anything else, its routing location is going to determine where it goes. I found these nice 2 little bolts and nuts next to the hole where they fit perfectly for my needs. Now all I need is a section of wire to run from the relay to the battery with, and a ring terminal on what's left to attach the long fuel pump leg to the circuit breaker. I've got a couple of inline fuses to install before we're finished, but this time I'm doing my wiring a bit differently where the battery lugs are concerned. Instead of using Allen bolts to secure bare wires into their own little holes in a crappy battery terminal, I'm changing out my battery terminal to one that actually fits, and this one accepts only ring terminals for all of its electrical connections. Starting with the factory relay box connections, I'm using this off-on brand hydraulic crimper. We call it that because the control knob is labeled backwards, not because that's who actually makes it. On is off is on. It's a cheap Amazon purchase and I didn't make it. I just know that this is going to make better connections than what I was doing before, and I'm just grateful to be using it. But it's off on brand. I crimped an additional 10 gauge fuse leader for my accessory interior relay, you know, the one behind the dash, into the 4 factory relay box connections. I want all these connections up here together because they're all engine function related. Even though all the things that connect to it are fused individually inside the car, there's nothing protecting the wiring up to that relay, and there should be in the event that anything catastrophic ever happens. Next, I need a terminal lug for my alternator wire. Kind of important. Each time I do this, I'm trimming the connection to get fresh, clean, straight copper for optimal contact when the hydraulic crimping tool crushes it. Every connection received adhesive thick mill shrink tubing insulation on its ends. It's wise to do this on every crimped electrical connection you ever make if it connects to a battery on either end. And also, another lug for my starter. Next, I've got to fuse the amplifiers, and what better thing to fuse amplifiers with than a stereo-grade fuse holder left over from another project that you refuse to throw away, believing someday it's a stupid thing to ever have to buy again. Never thought I'd use it, but I did. Rather than complicate things, I just drilled holes and pop riveted it into place. But with all this extra junk installed, that takes care of all the safety stuff that I had to do for the circuits that I pulled. This battery terminal is far better than the one I had. Some call it the military-style battery terminal. I don't know why, but okay. I searched that and got the same stupid gold-plated one I had in the list of results. It's Monday. I've got 3 actual days left before the shootout. I've been pulling some serious late nights. I've been up here every day. I really shouldn't be doing anything technical right now, but this is the way my cards were dealt. This right here is pin 85, the relay trigger for the fuel pump relay you just saw me wiring up. That is the circuit breaker. And this right here, I have managed to fish all the way through, well, except for a small section, to come out over here in its own piece of corrugated tubing. And that is going to wind up connecting to the fuel pump test circuit. The test circuit is connected to the fuel pump circuit. So my relay will be triggered by the actual fuel pump circuit. This is just such a pain in the butt to shoot. There's nowhere where I can reach in and really give you any detail, so. It's moments like these where I reflect on making that video about creating my own Elantra engine harness for a turbo DSM, and I decided to leave all the diagnostic test connectors in place even though I have ECM Link version 3. Pretty proud of myself for that decision at that moment.
Very proud of you.
Glad I didn't make this more difficult than it had to be on myself. And now, of course, with that out of the way, I just need to ground the other leg of the relay trigger circuit. I'm just going to make a short enough length to ground it to its own mounting bolt on the body and keep it simple. At this stage of the game, I'm pretty much in reassembly mode, putting all the things back together that I took apart to hide other things. There's a lot of minor odds and ends that I need to wrap up before putting the carpet back in here, and most all of it, except for finishing up the stereo, is just cable management and cleaning up all the mess I made from my wiring. I want the cleanest installation I can achieve, while leaving all the factory fit and finish as stock appearing as possible. To pull this off, everything has to be buttoned up underneath the carpet. That has to be done first. I still need to remove the seat and the subs again in order to put the carpet back in here. The subs are really just installed right now as a test fit. I established their position to terminate all the ends of the wires that connect to them first and to make sure they had the clearance they needed. But before I forget, I need to run some power and ground wires for that water methanol kit. I intend for them to share the power conduit that runs down the passenger side so that people aren't stepping on them when they climb in and out. It would have been a whole lot smarter if I did this before I put all the conduit stuff back together. Although with all that practice I got working in the front fender, this is a cakewalk. I just ran the water methanol kit wiring along with the power wire for the accessory relay under the glove box. There I can just, snake it into the center console and add bullet connectors to them to plug them into existing terminals that I already have waiting for it. Alright, next I just routed and trained the power wires where they're out of the way, all the way to each amplifier. I recycled the old ground connections I was using from my old PPI amplifiers because they're already made, and all I had to do was cut them to length. I found a glorious bolt for the TCU, formerly a grounding point, just to bolt it down out of the way underneath the seat. Glorious, my lord! And now that that's taken care of, I just need remote leads and RCA cables to connect to the remote turn-on functions and audio signals of the subs. Fortunately, I did that with the bullet connector the first time and already have the splitter to support multiple amps for the remote turn-on lead in the trash pile as well. So none of this was troublesome. So after trimming all the wires and subs to length and screwing their ends into the terminals, I can finally take them all apart and remove them now. Just not yet. Priorities. Don't sit on your brand new underseat subwoofer. Problem created. The grill's just glued on and sitting on it broke the glue. You can't tell, but take my word for it. Back to the water methanol kit, power and ground again. There's already a harness full of wires that are running to the back of the car, and they contain the power and ground wire for the controller as well as the pump control circuit. I had no need for these power and ground wires to run the length of the car, so I cut them where I'll terminate them inside the dash and pulled them out of the loom. There, I could just install a bullet connector and plug them into an existing terminal, except that I didn't include the pump wire like an idiot. So I get to cut that bullet connector off and do it a second time correctly. Okay, now both the power wires are ready to simply be plugged in. You do most things better the second time around. I actually wound up pulling out the ground wire and not using it at all. I'll just ground the kit in the back of the car to the chassis. I mean, who pulls a ground wire? Next, I separated my fuel pump ground from the water methanol kit's old ground, cut the wire from the pump where its old power source used to be, and then crimped it to the new power source wire that I've got pulled up to the dash. This gave me the opportunity to join the loom for the front half of this water methanol kit, where the controller is, into the loom for the pump, and I fished the power wire from the dash into the loom to the back of the car, concealed by the interior trim. This fixed all the wire links, tidied up the cables, and removed my spider web of former pecker tracks that I've left here. I really won't miss any of this wiring. But that checks off a few more of the things that I have to finish. This was such a complicated subwoofer installation video that I had to make a list of things just to keep track of everything that it affected. I'm glad I made this list because everything that was affected so far sucked exactly the way it was. One of the things that sucks is that fuel pump wiring, and I'm not going to actually do a whole lot about it for the time being. I'm in a time crunch to get a lot of this finished so that I can use this car at an event. But some of the things that I have in store for it don't look like they're going to get accomplished, not in the time remaining and not before I leave. So all I'm doing is crimping the new power cable to the old one that's already here. It completes the circuit and it gives me a fuel pump for now. I've got plenty of fuel for the setup that I have right now, so all this is fine. I ended up bolting the fuel pump ground right back to the original bolt that it came from. But it's not the ideal solution that I have in store for it, so when you see that video, you're going to forgive me. It's a video that I think needs to be made, and I'm now voicing this video in the future. I mean, I'm not in the future. It's just this video's from, never mind. Look, it was just a good choice. I needed the car to be running and to successfully complete this install. We'll get back to that one. I'm about at the stage where I get to test fit the carpet. I've cleaned the inside of the car, so I'm going to test fit a clean carpet. I'm not breaking out the power washer because I don't have the time to wait for the carpet to dry. So the singular beverage stain on this 30-year-old carpet is just going to have to keep on hanging out. I like the inside of this car to be clean to a point of reason, but you can't get me to care less about the outside of it. It could be that washing this car could destroy it. Like spices in an entree that make the dish, this, the mismatched wheels, the license plate, it all completes a sentence to the observer that cannot be improved upon by giving it a bath. Sorry, you might have noticed all the pollen accumulated in the door and trunk jams. This is no accident and it isn't easily recreated. But damn it, my carpet must be vigorously vacuumed. And with the carpet ready to go, time to pull everything that I just installed right back out of here. My wire routing's all sorted and the electrical connections, short of just installing the battery, have all been made. After we get all this stuff put back in here again, we're going to find out if I fully reconnected all these circuits properly or not. I've just basically rewired everything I've ever installed into this car, so I hope so. I did a test fit, accommodating the thickness of the carpet, and tested the clearance with the seats. But when I tested the clearance with the seats, the carpet wasn't in it. One of the things that I want to do is mount the tabs directly to the floor, but let them be the point that gives and takes up the slack for the thickness of that carpet. So to do this, I have to cut reliefs in the carpet and the padding. As much as I'd rather not, it's a very small price to pay in order to complete this improvement. I do believe this is an improvement. I've already explained why I want and need subwoofers in this car, and there are many reasons. Some are noble, some are selfish. But at no point would anyone but me consider subwoofers to ever be a performance upgrade. I'm here to tell you that they can be, yeah. But likely only if you've already got subwoofers in your race car. So what I've done is remove an enormous amount of weight from behind my rear axle. Not just from behind it, but also from over a foot above it and behind it. This is a front-wheel drive car. It doesn't make sense to add weight behind the fulcrum when you're trying to get that weight of the car shifted and moving, especially not while you're gripping with those front wheels. So just like when we moved the battery, we just shifted weight forward, a lot of it. I lose absolutely nothing feature and function wise from this car when this video started. I just moved a small fraction of the weight that was removed right between both axles and parallel to the hub centers instead of a foot above it. I'm talking about the real reason why you're 25 minutes into a video about installing subwoofers that involves fuel pumps, methanol, and is only intended to help improve my 60-foot times. I think you guys know everything else that I'm doing right now. I explained what I did to get us here, and we're at the stage where I don't need to explain this car going back together, you know? You don't need to see this the other way around. In some ways, I needed the ballast. The subwoofers that I had were by far the worst case scenario. They were never built to fit the contours of any car. They were just free, and you get what you pay for. For what's now only $159 a piece, when I bought these, they were $199. But anyway, for their price and size, these little underseat subwoofers have fixed all the caveats of my old subwoofers in a tight, compact package that let me place the weight where I needed it. If my 60-foot improves, then what you're possibly witnessing right here is the first ever performance subwoofer installation. It will be interesting to see what the results are once we get my car back onto the scales. We've done that a few times and we have numbers for comparison now. But on a side note, every single electrical circuit that runs parallel to my charging system and ECU has now been rewired. The useless automatic transmission stuff's all been removed, and my car's almost ready to go. I say almost because the oil leak is still persistent. I'm going to try to fix that by removing the autometer gauge and just screwing a factory sending unit back into it with lots of layers of Teflon tape. I still have an idiot light, so clearly they were thinking of me when they built the car. Having my oil pressure is really kind of a luxury. I would rather have all my oil on the inside of the engine right now, and I'll deal with that later. For a 30-year-old car that's been through as much as this one has, it sure has one nice, clean interior in it. I'm telling you, the experience from the inside of this car is always the polar opposite of what everyone on the outside of it is experiencing. It's only ever fun in here. It gives you everything you ask for. Fixing all of this was both fun and satisfying, so let's put the battery back in it and see how much good was actually accomplished by any of this. Finally, we're rid of that stupid, shiny, blingy battery terminal that matched absolutely nothing on this entire car. So glad that's gone. I bet Matt and Mike $1 that the mystery pile weighed 68 pounds. Matt got his scales, he bet 58, and Mike split the difference at 64. Price is Right rules, closest without going over wins.
Do anything?
2 pounds.
Let's pick this thing up by the edges and set it on there. Should I turn it?
I think it was lighter.
What do we have?
Man.
Let go, let go.
68.
Did I see 68? I see 68.
I call that 68.
You said 58.
He's been in here weighing it before we
Nope.
got here.
We got weights and fit. There we go.
I called it 68 pounds.
That's what it was. And he just tacked a couple pounds from the wires.
He hustled it.
I think it was a good guess.
I had $1 in the truck.
I'll pay Mike's dollar.
Oh my goodness,
That's the bet.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir. I hustled him. I hustled him. That's all me.
And this is where the story takes a turn for me. I don't realize it at this moment, but what I'm doing here is creating a 1.5 foot wide oil spot underneath the oil filter housing. Not ideal, but I find it later. Much of what follows doesn't get recorded because I'm out of time, but let's finish what we're doing first. The wideband looks happy, still not fully warmed up yet, but let's see how the subs work. Love me some Day Job Orchestra. I like how that's what played first. I didn't lose anything in this transition. The amp I replaced on the 4-ways was 50 watts per channel. The head unit I'm using has a peak output of 50 watts per channel. With the advent of digital signal processing, stuff like crossovers that once had to be hand-wired and soldered are things that you can just dial in right on the face of your head unit. So, rather than having to get out screwdrivers and walk to the trunk for the old school equipment I had, because something in the driver's seat doesn't sound quite right, now I can just dial right in on the Alpine's built-in power IC. No more screwdrivers. This is much simpler, much lighter. Cletus said you always have to test your two-step. Of course, that doesn't help me with the oil mess that I'm creating right now. It's the night before the drive, and my O2s are working normally. Not even 75,000 miles on this car yet. All my wiring seems to be working fine, or else none of my accessories would. The cutout works. At this point, I was convinced that the car was going to make it, and that's when I found the oil leak. So after 5 hours of sleep, I went back up to the shop, borrowed the tool from Mike that let me permanently fix it, then loaded my cooler, my camera gear, clothes, and rolled out around 2:30 p.m. Should get there by midnight, right? But right around Doswell, I had a really bad fuel problem. Luckily, I managed to limp it back to the shop without hurting it, but with no time or energy left for this, I just accepted it wasn't ready. I unloaded all my gear from the Elantra into my truck and then restarted that 9-hour drive back to the shootout again. I drove all day and into the night. Got there on 2 a.m. for the best night of sleep I've had in a week, but that bar was set really, really low. This time I got 6 hours. I was ready for it.
Looks like they had availability at ground zero. You know what that is in the background. My buddies are right around here somewhere across the street. Actually, my buddies are all the way around here.
I figured out exactly what the problem was, and I kicked myself the whole time I was at the shootout for having the tools to fix it right inside the car with me. But of course, that's hindsight. I jumped right on it when I got back. O2 sensor calibration. Not only did it sit for a week without power to it, everything in my fuel system's resistance just changed. The fuel pump, the water methanol kit, the wideband controller, all of it rewired. I did only one thing different than a normal calibration cycle. I blew the sensor out with compressed air first, then I ran a 5-minute heat cycle on it, and then I did the calibration cycle. It's almost a brand new sensor, but it got caked with soot from being extremely rich. From where I was sitting during the drive, my gauge read lean. I'm talking like 19:1, very lean. So it was telling the ECU to add lots of fuel. That fouled everything and put the fire out while I was cruising. So yeah, all the dang time it just needed a calibration cycle. O2 socket was in the trunk. Like I said earlier, common sense things that I lack the common sense to always think of. No regrets, I love my truck and I love the shootout.
An auto transmission Evo.
Thank you for drawing my attention.
Ouch.
There's a much longer list of mods than I ever put on that whiteboard. Things that I really wanted to do before the shootout that I didn't get done only because I got pinched for time. It just took too much paint and way too dang long to clean and renovate my shop. So right now you're gonna see some more of those pre-shootout preparations. Like putting it on the scales, right? No, it means I'm putting it on the dyno. This is a performance subwoofer installation after all. Didn't you read the video title? We've tested it at wastegate pressure before, but now that everything's rewired and the wastegate solenoid is plugged back in again, we're going to start off by testing the old subwoofer tune I had going on before and get some data. And then we're going to retune it for my new subs.
Why is the boost doing that? Because whatever reason that read like that is why your fueling was like that. You see the raggedy boost signal?
Yeah.
Yeah. Why are we missing? This should be a ramp up, and then it should plateau down.
Is this thing on? Okay, in that last pass, my subwoofers malfunctioned because we got a dirty signal from a map sensor. So I'm going to go ahead and swap out map sensors, and we're going to test these subwoofers again. All straight.
After fixing the map signal interference so that we could accurately test sound pressure levels, we did a plug reading to determine if all those dBs recorded by my knock sensor signal were lying to us or not. We also did a comparison of the O2 sensor's signal to noise ratio versus a tailpipe mounted O2 sensor. We found that my wideband O2 signal reads a half point lean, which makes my actual fuel delivery a half point fat. We discovered or corrected everything that's been impeding my subwoofer's performance all these years. The issues we couldn't correct, we just tuned around. So now with all the signal to noise ratio problems sorted, let's turn this thing all the way up and see what kind of wattage it generates.
Stereo's not even on. 297 on the original pull, 364 after
There you go.
some fuel and timing changes.
And I think there's still a little bit more meat on them bones.
There's a whole lot more torque out the backside.
Oh yeah. Look at that. We gained about 60 pounds of torque.
But look, so before peak torque was just right here. It made 318
That's right.
peak torque and then it fell off. Versus now, it's making that same torque at 6 grand.
Mm-hmm.
So
Nice.
should have a much better power.
Nice gains. It was a whole lot better than going to the track. Got a lot more data, a whole lot faster. We sorted it in an evening. Now I look forward to going back to the track. Test out my performance subwoofers.
Absolutely.
Alright, fine, we'll look at it on the scales too. These are mats and they've only been used underneath one of his own cars once. I think this is my Elantra's 4th time with him, but this is for science. Anyway, these are the old numbers without me sitting in it. And here we are, setting the car down after all my changes. In kilos for everyone not in America. People from everywhere appreciate that percentages will always remain the same, right? But we're going to do the comparison versus this old data that's in pounds and percentages. Immediately, you can see there's a 60-pound difference in total weight loss to the chassis. We removed 68 from everywhere, but the MTX subwoofers weigh 12.5 pounds apiece, adding 25 pounds back onto it. So that 60-pound gross weight differential that we're measuring can easily be explained away by how much gas there is in the tank right now. Give or take a couple of gallons, and there you go. I'm a little over half a tank right now. But if you look at the front wheels, I've added 9 pounds onto the front axle, and I did it by taking 70 pounds from behind the rear axle off the car, mostly on the passenger side. You can see that wheel's a bit low. But add up the percentages and the weight distribution between the front and rear axle, it was 61.6 on the front, 38.4 on the rear. Now it's 63.4 on the front and 36.6 on the rear. That's roughly 2% weight shift right onto the front axle, and some people spend a whole lot more money than I just did in order to achieve that. Plus, I have a whole lot more sub bass than I had before too. These underseat subwoofers really work. But seriously, everything you do to get closer to 70-30 on a front-wheel drive car helps for drag racing, and it just turned my subwoofers into ballast. You'll also notice that before there was only an 11-pound difference between the wheels on the rear axle. But now it's a 48-pound difference, so there's still a lot of room for improvement with my suspension, and of course, these numbers also don't have me sitting inside it. If you want to know how much Jafro weighs and what happens to it when I get in, I'm not shy. 192 pounds, which is fantastic for someone my age, and 2 pounds of that's probably hair. Both axles are 80 pounds heavier on the driver's side whenever I'm sitting in it. Now, there's a lot less of everything going on inside it with the trunk empty and the interior all put back together. It became clear to me that my old subwoofers were never going to break their old record of 1220 at 118 mile per hour in this Elantra. The best this Elantra could ever do with them was a 13008. But I want the new subwoofers to go at least 12s. Please argue about the ridiculousness of performance subwoofers in the comments. It helps me. Hit the like button if you learned anything about something other than subwoofers, or maybe just show your appreciation to the Patreon supporters who brought you this TV-length 4K episode uninterrupted. I can only do this because of them. If you wanted to maybe sign up for extra content and to help them carry the load, you can visit patreon.com/Jafromobile. Every Patreon member makes a huge difference in what I get to do here. I've got a different series to wrap up first, but now we've got a baseline for what comes next. Stay tuned!